Hey, it's Alex from Android Central. Today we're going to take a look at the new HTC One, comparing it to the LG Nexus 4. So these are both leading high-end Android phones. The Nexus released last November, the HTC One should be making its way out in April. And although they're two of the main flag bearers for Android right now, there are a lot of differences in strengths and weaknesses to get into. First up, industrial design. The Nexus has a glass front and back and a soft touch plastic trim, so the trim is easy to grip onto. The rear glass with its crystal reflection process has a nice reflective look to it. It has a tendency to scratch, there's no way around that, it is glass after all, but because of the colour that's hidden pretty well. The HTC One takes a completely different approach with an aluminium unibody injected plastic area which houses parts of the antenna. So you've got a curved back and the brushed metal has a really nice premium finish to it. If you've ever used a MacBook, you know what this feels like. It's essentially the same texture. And I think I prefer this a little more over the glass than the Nexus 4. That's not to say the Nexus feels cheap in any way. In terms of dimensions, we're looking at about the same width on both devices. The HTC One's a bit taller on account of its front-facing stereo speakers, which are actually extremely bassy and really high quality for a smartphone. Of course, the Nexus has a traditional rear speaker setup peeking through the glass panel. The HTC One's also a little thinner, although that's amplified by the fact that the entire back panel is curved. Spec-wise, the Nexus is running a Snapdragon S4 Pro quad-core chipset, while the HTC One has a newer Snapdragon 600, that's also a quad-core. Both high-end chips, the 600 is newer and a little bit faster, and that can be seen when you go from one to the other. Both very fast phones. If the HTC One pulls ahead just a little bit, you'll notice that if you jump from one to the other. Again, there are differences in storage. The Nexus 4 comes in 8GB and 16GB, while the HTC One you can choose between 32 or 64. There is a pretty big difference when it comes to screens though. The Nexus 4 has a 4.7-inch IPS display, a little over 720p, and the HTC One cranks it all the way up to 1080p on a Super LCD 3 panel. Both are excellent, very bright displays, but the HTC One has the insane pixel density of 1080p, and a little more brightness and a little more color clarity to it. Camera wise, things get a bit more complicated. The Nexus has a traditional 8MP rear camera with a BSI sensor, which is decent but struggles indoors and in low light. The HTC One has HTC's so-called ultra pixel camera, which is technically a 4MP shooter but has larger pixels, and so each little dot can capture that much more light. In completely ideal lighting conditions, there's not much difference between the two. Obviously the Nexus's larger megapixel count means that it potentially can capture more detail, but the HTC One pulls ahead in low light performance, macro photography and video recording thanks to its optical image stabilization. So neither is perfect, and HTC in particular is a trade-off between low light performance and overall megapixel count that not everyone's going to be keen on. That said, the Nexus's camera is decent, but little more, and it won't blow you away with its photographic capabilities. One advantage it does have going for it though is Photosphere, Google's 360-degree Panorama tech, and that's included in Android 4.2 and isn't on the HTC One. We'd probably say the HTC One wins on connectivity, although the Nexus 4 might make for a better world phone. There are various flavours of HTC One coming to the market. We've got European model right here, which includes support for Euro LTE bands and quad-band HSPA. Of course, in the US, you've got carrier-specific versions. The Nexus tops out a 42Mb HSPA, although you've got pentaband radio to go with it, which means it'll work just fine on T-Mobile and AT&T. On the software side, things get a little less familiar. The Nexus 4 runs unadulterated vanilla Android 4.2 Jelly Bean, complete with on-screen keys, and the fact that it's a Nexus means it'll always be first with Android updates. The HTC One takes a different path. We've got Android 4.1.2 and HTC's Sense 5 UI, and the button setup's a bit different. You've got back, home, and if you want to multitask, you've got to double tap that home key. From a user experience perspective, both are good, well-designed UIs. HTC brings a lot of new stuff to the table with its redesigned launcher, which includes the Blink feed page, whereas the Nexus, you get a bare-bone Android experience with Google Experience apps, and you can build on top of that. So with the Nexus, you've got the pure Google Android experience, whereas HTC gives you some more bells and whistles, though technically you are a point version behind. Pricing is something else to consider. The Nexus 4 is available on Google Play at a heavily subsidised price, $300 in the US or £240 in the UK. The HTC One will set you back more than double that off contract, and you'll be looking at a hefty multi-year contract if you want one for free. So there's probably no question that the Nexus 4 is better value, though of course some corners have to be cut if you want a phone at this price. You're limited in storage, and of course LTE is out of the question. So there you go, very quick comparison of the HTC One and Nexus 4. Both very nice phones for different reasons, and we'll leave the ultimate verdict up to you. Thanks for watching.